Good evening, dear viewers. My name is Susanna Boshian, and I am the host of English language program of National Democratic Alliance. Our guest today is Garo Yegnukian, the man who wears many hats. He is a U.S. attorney admitted to practice in the state of New York for over 33 years. He owns and runs a number of successful businesses and in the United States for 45 years. He is an uncompromising human rights defender in Armenia for more than 14 years. And last but not least, he is a council member of National Democratic Alliance. But before we start our interview with Mr. Yegnukian, dear viewers, I would kindly ask you to share this broadcast and right from the beginning, as well as subscribing to National Democratic Alliance's YouTube channel. By doing this immediately, you help us to spread information that cannot be found anywhere else. Greetings, Mr. Yegnukian, and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Mr. Yegnukian, as we know, the situation in Artsakh is, because of the total blockage by Azerbaijan, is getting worse by hours. Mass starvation of the Armenian population seems to be inevitable. How do you see the developments or the outcome of the humanitarian disaster?
The blockade has been going on for over 6 months, but the total blockade, where nothing gets through, not even Red Cross can bring any supplies or transport the sick, has been prevented for the past 20-something days. So for almost a month now, there have been no food supplies to Artsakh. And as such, the situation is getting, as you mentioned, worse by the hour, because relying on local produce is not enough. For example, bread is in shortage at this point because there is no flour. There's not enough local production to satisfy the demand. So we are seeing already at this time cases of at least no bread being throughout Artsakh. And we have had already unfortunate situations where the mother had to walk 5 kilometers to get food, and she left the children at home, who ended up dying because they ended up leaving the house and going into a parked car, and from the heat they died. So this type of situations, plus emergency situations, medical, where they need immediate attention of specialized medical attention, and that is not available in Artsakh. They have to travel to Yerevan, Armenia, in order to have those specialized treatment, and that is causing health issues, and it's inevitable that there will be death because of that. This situation is a humanitarian crisis. It's not a humanitarian crisis to be or in the future. We are already in it. As I was saying, 20-something days, we are already in the humanitarian crisis. So at this point, what's left to do is start counting bodies on the streets who have died because of starvation or illness. The only solution to this at this point is an international intervention of peacekeeping forces. And I want to emphasize that it's not just an international intervention by demanding that Azerbaijan open the corridor, but it has to have a peacekeeping force, international peacekeeping force, that would force the opening of the corridor by any means necessary. And that's what an international peacekeeping force has a mandate for. Unlike the so-called Russian peacekeepers, who are not an international peacekeeping force. They don't have a mandate, and the mandate is only given by the UN Security Council to the peacekeepers. And they have the ones who have the UN Security Council's mandate. They have the right and the tools, the right to do it and the tools to implement it, opening of the border and securing the safety of the people of Artsakh. Unfortunately, the administration or the local government in Artsakh has not raised that issue to the level that I just expressed, meaning they did not demand, request, plead, beg for international peacekeeping forces. And all those adjectives that I said, the verbs that plead, beg, ask for, they're all legitimate ways of asking for help. And now they have to do that. Unfortunately, the authorities in Artsakh, as the authorities in Armenia proper, are pro-Russian, and their only intention is to prop up the Russian peacekeepers, quote-unquote peacekeepers mandate, and to have only the Russians monitor the situation. But we all know, and the world knows it, and that's why they won't agree with that. We all know that Russia is a terrorist state. Russia has, Putin has been designated as a criminal. And UN, under no circumstances, would give the Russian, we say peacekeeping forces, but it's really occupying forces. They will not give the occupying forces the mandate to do any humanitarian or other acts that are necessary to secure the safety of the Armenians in Artsakh. So this situation is going to end up being either, as I said, we're going to see corpses on the streets of Stepanakert, or the local government and the people of Artsakh will have to come out to the street and demand intervention by international peacekeeping forces mandated by the UN Security Council.
Hopefully they will. It seems that all mediating parties of this conflict agree that Artsakh, or as they call it, Nagorno-Karabakh, should be part of Azerbaijan, except for France. If we accept President Macron's statement that he is doing more for Armenia than Pashinyan, means that he doesn't accept Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan. What are your thoughts concerning how the world sees the outcome of the conflict?
It's the question that you're asking, and from the point of view, here we're not talking about already the humanitarian crisis of Artsakh. Here we're talking about the, who does Artsakh belong to. So it's the issue becomes more involved, whether the borders under whose side is Artsakh. Is it Azerbaijani side or is it the Armenian side? Unfortunately, the Armenian government, successive Armenian governments, and when I say successive, they start from the 1990s, from Levon Ter-Petrosyan, onto the 2000s being Robert Kochalian, and then onto Serge Sarkisyan, and now under Nikol Pashinyan. All four administrations in Armenia have inadvertently accepted that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. Why do I say inadvertently? Because the ceasefire agreement that they signed in the early 90s, right from that point on, they have always, and under the Madrid principles, they have accepted the false premise that Armenia has occupied Azeri lands. And by saying that Armenia has occupied Azeri lands, you inadvertently accept that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. So when you say that the mediating parties have said that Artsakh is part of Armenia, there is some truth to it, but it's not entirely true. It's true as far as the latest statements of Pashinyan is concerned. Pashinyan and his cohorts in the present regime have stated outright that Artsakh, bless you, that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. Russia, through the mouth of Putin, Peskov, and a number of other government officials of Russia, have numerous times and unequivocally said that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. However, the West, in this case the United States, European Union, and France in particular, have never, and I want to emphasize this word never, have never said that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. What they have said is that, for example, as the United States, and became clear also when the U.S. ambassador in Armenia clarified her latest statement, that they're not saying that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. They're saying, look, we are mediators. We are here to provide you with a table and chairs so you can sit down and negotiate. Now, if you guys say, both of you, in this case, when I say both, I mean, if Armenia and Azerbaijan are saying that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan, the United States is saying, who are we to tell you otherwise? They have no right. In other words, our U.S. is not a judge to come and say, well, no, Armenia, you're wrong. Artsakh is not part of Azerbaijan. They're not a judge. They're a mediator. They're providing the platform for you to negotiate. And by providing the platform for you to negotiate, by their position, their legal position, they cannot interfere or take sides of either one. This is where, under the OSCE Minsk group, where Russia, France, and the United States were mediating partners, Russia is the only one that violated this very important neutrality position. Russia is the one, through the mouth of Putin and others, Russia is the one that said that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. But never did the United States, France, or the European Union say it that way. All they have said is, if you agree, both of you agree that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan, then we are here to make sure that the Armenian population in Artsakh is safe and sound. That's why when we look at this Artsakh issue, we have to look at it from two different points of view. One is the humanitarian crisis, humanitarian issue, human rights, the right to life, right to health is on one side. And on the other side, we have the territorial integrity of the nation states, in this case, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, the position that Armenia should have had for the past 30 years and should have now is that, yes, we agree that the territorial integrity of Armenia and Azerbaijan should be upheld by international norms and conventions. Therefore, if you have a disagreement, and by the way, in the UN, out of the 200-something states that are in the UN, half of them have territorial disputes between each other. So that doesn't change things as far as if they want to be in the UN, if they're accepted in the UN according to certain borders. UN does not accept a country in its family with certain territorial demands or borders. They just accept that Armenia is an independent state, Azerbaijan is an independent state. As far as the borders are concerned, or territorial integrity, that has to be determined by international law. And there are, I'm assuming that Azerbaijanis have their arguments and they can bring their, I imagine what their arguments are as far as why Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. But I also know that Armenian side has much stronger, 10 times stronger proof that Artsakh is part of Armenia than the Azeris have. All Azeris can show as far as where does Artsakh belong to is the decision made by Lenin-Stalin pact with Ataturk, and that has been recognized by the world to be illegal to begin with, because it contradicts international law. So, coming to this issue of Artsakh is that the world has accepted that Artsakh is part of Armenia, that's the false premise that this present Armenian government wants to, led by Pashinyan, Nikol Pashinyan, the present government, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Russia are behind that. So this may seem paradoxical, but our own government is actually collaborating with our enemies. Our enemies in this case are Russia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, because these three are saying it outright that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. So if Armenia, in the face of Nikol Pashinyan, is saying the same thing, the West, in this case United States and France and the European Union, can't do anything more. They can't be more Catholic than the Pope, as the saying goes.
On July 21st, the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, co-chaired by Congressman Chris Smith, Republican from New Jersey, and Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, held a congressional hearing on the subject of safeguarding the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. The National Democratic Alliance had a formidable input in making this hearing possible through the efforts of its lobbying partner of the Livingston Group in Washington, D.C. It was clear from the hearing that every participant, being it congressmen, ambassadors, and experts, were in agreement that Armenians of Artsakh are facing the second Armenian genocide, or at the minimum, a humanitarian disaster, amplified by the ethnic cleansing. During the hearing, there were unprecedented harsh criticism of Aliyev and Erdogan, comparing Aliyev to Saddam Hussein, labeling Erdogan as the main Islamist of the world, and predicting that they both will end up in the same jail cell. However, even after the hearing, we don't see any tangible acts on the ground that would take a headway in solving the humanitarian crisis in Armenia. Why is that, Mr. Yegnukian?
Oh, it's a difficult question, and there are many parts to it that correlate each other and sometimes actually contradict also. Speaking about that hearing, from the title that you could see, it's just talking about the humanitarian aspect of it. As you can see, that hearing was not concerning who does Artsakh belong to. Is Artsakh part of Azerbaijan or is it part of Armenia? That was not the issue at the hearing. At that hearing, the congressional hearing, the Tom Lantos Commission Tamlasnos was a now deceased congressman, very well respected in the human rights field. That's why it's named after him. The commission's intention was to ring the bells of emergency bells, and a congressional hearing is something that goes on the record in Congress. Therefore, from this point on, any congressman can pull out this congressional hearing. And by the way, besides the experts or the ambassadors speaking, besides their verbal presentation, each one of them has also submitted a written statement of their point of view. So that written statement and the verbal testimony that they give, and they are called witnesses, by the way, because what they're doing is actually a testimony. Their verbal testimony goes on congressional record. So in the future, in the days to come, months to come, congressmen, senators, and government officials from the White House, State Department, can refer to this congressional hearing as part of evidence that they need to go to action. So if we look at it another way, what this congressional hearing did, it gave the tools to the Congress, to the State Department, to the White House, to act and to use those tools to prevent the humanitarian disaster. They put the alarm that we are at the doorstep of the second Armenian genocide. There was no misconstrued statement on that. Everybody agreed that we are at the doorstep. Of course, some said we're already in it, some said we're at this doorstep, but regardless. So at this point, to prevent a humanitarian disaster, there are a number of ways. For example, Armenia has a court order or a judgment by the International Court of Justice, which states that Azerbaijan has to clear the corridor and it has to be open for free traffic. This is the judgment. Now, as in everyday life, whenever a court passes a judgment, the court finishes its obligation at that point. Court has no more obligation once the judgment is passed. From that point on, it is up to the plaintiff or the person who brought the complaint, in this case Armenia, to make sure that the court's order is obeyed or the judgment is implemented. So what does the plaintiff or the party that brought the complaint do? They demand the other party, the defendant, in this case Azerbaijan, and they give Azerbaijan reasonable time, and the word reasonable time I put in quotes because there's no rule as to what reasonable time is. So in this case, Armenia could impose its own reasonable time. It could give a notice to Azerbaijan that based on the International Court of Justice's judgment on such and such a day, it's already been months since we had that judgment, Azerbaijan, you have 5 days to open the corridor. 5 days to bring tractors, whatever they have to bring, mechanical, to clear the road, so to speak. After 5 days, and that would be considered reasonable time. After 5 days, if Azerbaijan does not open the road, the corridor, then by UN laws and regulations, Armenia has to apply to the UN National Security Council. Because in this case, the UN National Security Council, if we have to compare it with the real life, the way it works for individuals, if you have a judgment and the defendant doesn't obey the judgment, what do you do? In the United States, for example, you go to the marshal. The marshal is the person or the governmental agency or someone that has a license issued by the government to go and impose the court's order. So the marshal, in a civil case, would go and open the door of the door that you want to go into. If the other side doesn't want to open the door, the marshal would go and maybe even break the door. So in this case, the UN National Security Council is the quote-unquote marshal that you have to go to demand implementation of the court order. Armenia did not do that. Now, this is mind-boggling, and I'm sure our Western partners, United States and European Union, they just throwing their hands up in the air and they're saying, why the hell are you not going to the UN Security Council and applying for the court order to be implemented? The answer was given by Armenia's representative to the International Court of Justice. He said that we assume that there is a country in the National Security Council that would deny our application to the National Security Council. And then he said a funny thing. He said, you all know what country that is. Of course we know what country that is. That's Russia. So the question arises, why is Armenia trying to cover up the embarrassment that Russia will face when they veto the implementation of the International Courts of Justice's judgment? Why do we care if Russia would be embarrassed? Let them be embarrassed. If they're going to veto, let them be. But at least you know that you have done it and that you know who has vetoed it. Because that's very important. Because the other thing that was mentioned during that hearing in Congress is that there is an international convention that was accepted that when a country can unilaterally interfere or intervene in a humanitarian crisis to prevent it if there is no other options left. Now, by Armenia not applying to the UN National Security Council, Armenia has not exasperated all their options. So it becomes very difficult for example, the United States to unilaterally decide to interfere. Because Azerbaijan could say, well, Armenia hasn't applied to the National Security Council. Why are you interfering, United States? Or, United States, you are supposed to be a mediating party, so you have to be neutral, so you can't interfere. So that creates problems for the United States. But that doesn't prevent from, for example, France doing it. Since the Minsk group, the OSCE Minsk group, is for practical purposes, doesn't exist anymore because Russia is out, so it collapsed. So theoretically, it's still on paper, but in reality, it doesn't exist anymore. So in a way, France's hands are untied, and France could unilaterally interfere on that internationally accepted, I forgot the exact term in English, but they can interfere to prevent a humanitarian crisis. I'm hoping that we won't come to that. I'm hoping that, as I mentioned earlier, that our compatriots in Artsakh will stand up, the people of Artsakh, because I really don't have any hope with the government of Artsakh, the so-called administration of Artsakh. I hope the people of Artsakh, 120,000 of them, at least a third, can fill up the streets of Stepanakert, which they have done before. 40,000 have come out to the street, and that's a formidable number. They would come out to the street with signs in their hands asking for international peacekeepers, because that will be the trigger which will have, in other words, if the government doesn't do it, but the people ask for it, the UN National Security Council may look at it as an application of the Armenian government, which they haven't done. Why? Because if you're a democratic country, the power belongs to the people. The people are the, the government. The government officials are not the government, are not the state. The people are the state. So if the people demand international interference or with peacekeeping forces, then that might be considered by the UN National Security Council as an application. And even if they don't, that would give a country like France freer hand to act unilaterally and to prevent the humanitarian crisis.
Thank you for extended and detailed reply. And the next question is about National Democratic Alliance has announced that it is going to continue its vigorous lobbying efforts in the United States with the help of the Livingston Group, and the furtherance of that they are continuing for their fundraising activity, which our viewers can support with their donation by following the links below the broadcast. Can you please give us more details and explain the lobbying strategy that the National Democratic Alliance is envisioning?
My answer would be more detailed for a purpose, because for one reason, because most Armenians in Armenia, and of course a number of them in the diaspora and in the United States, do not understand how the US government works. And the reason why they don't understand, there's objective reasons for that, because they're being used to, for 70 years, the totalitarian Soviet regime, and for the past 30 years, the four so-called independent Armenian government officials have been the byproduct of the Soviet system, where the president or the prime minister is like the czar, the king, and whatever he says goes, and whatever the prime minister Pashinyan says is the law. Everybody else obeys him, be it the legislative or the courts, the legal, everyone or the prosecutor, they all depend or listen to what Pashinyan says. So coming from this mentality, it is very difficult for the Armenians to understand that the US doesn't work that way. That the US is really the powers are divided, and there was the division of powers. Legislative is independent, the executive is independent, and of course the judiciary is also independent. So those three, at least, parts, not counting the news agencies, which are the fourth state, so to speak, they're also independent. So this balance of power is kept. Yes, the executive is the one that implements things. In this case, when I brought the example, the executive is the marshal. So the President of the United States and the State Department, they implement the foreign policy. However, it is the Congress that dictates how the foreign policy has to be. It was the Congress puts parameters as to how far left or how far right the executive can go. And they do that not just by stating the policy, but also by controlling the funding. So if the executive wants to do certain things for which it needs money, and if Congress hasn't allocated the funds for what the executive wants to do. Executive can't do it for practical reasons because they don't have the money. So, and also, if we look at the U.S. And the State Department's and the U.S. government's role in this Artsakh conflict or Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, as mediators, the State Department or the executive, the White House, cannot take sides. This is what I explained before. However, Congress can. Congress is free to do whatever they want. Congress can have hearings, can have acts passed, they can put sanctions. Congress has the power to dictate to the State Department what direction they have to take. Congress may even dictate to the State Departments that they should not be mediators anymore of the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict. That from now on, the United States has to be an ally of Armenia, for example, as it was suggested in the written statement that Ambassador Brownback gave. Ambassador Brownback suggested that the United States should give to Armenia major non-NATO ally status. As we know, major non-NATO ally status has Israel, Taiwan, Japan, Australia, and many other countries, many prosperous countries.
And very desired one for us.
Yeah. So Ambassador Brownback suggested that in his written statements. And in that respect, Congress may turn around and say, United States, stop being a mediator, take the side of Armenia. Armenia is our ally. They're a democratic country, as Pelosi had said when she was here, that between Taiwan, Armenia, and Ukraine, there is that belt, democratic belt. If the United States is for democracy, then Congress can, quote unquote, force the State Department to take a more pro-Armenian position than what they have now. Now they have a neutral position as a mediator. So coming back to what National Democratic Alliance, along with its lobbying partner, the Livingston Group, intends to do, is that we intend to work with Congress very closely. And this congressional hearing is a good example that when we presented the congressman the information, the facts as to what's going on, they did take them, study them, accepted them, and announced it during the hearing, the thoughts on the ideas and the facts that we had presented. So this is a two-way street. We have to work. I wish that the Armenian government was doing what we're doing, because it would have been much easier, because they have more resources, they have more doors that they can open than we do. But we're doing as much as we can under the circumstances. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the Congress understands the dire circumstances as they are. We're going to make sure that the Congress, at least from the humanitarian point of view, does issue an act, a congressional act. Because if we compare what has happened, the hearing is like fact-finding mission. During the hearing, you present the facts. And then from those facts, Congress could have an act passed. An act is a law that has to be acted upon by the executive. So if Congress passes an act, as I was mentioning before, that the United States has to send humanitarian aid by airlifting it from wherever, and they give that order, then the State Department, the executive, will implement it. and they will not consider what Aliyev says or what Erdogan says. They will airlift the humanitarian aid to Artsakh directly from whatever airport that they want to. And they, as you know, the United States has many bases throughout the world, and they can do it from Greece, they could do it from Turkey, as unlikely it may sound, but it has happened before. In the 1990s, US government supplied flour or grain to Armenia, and it was done through Turkey. Turkey had no choice but to allow it to happen. So, because it was a humanitarian assistance. So, the least that Congress can do at this point is to relieve the humanitarian disaster. And of course, the most that Congress can do is to call for granting Armenia non-NATO, major non-NATO ally of the United States. And by doing that, we would solve also the security threat that is still lingering on and will linger on for as long as we live. That is what we're looking to achieve. And of course, I have to say this also, if the present government of Armenia changes soon, and if groups of people or parties or consensus building group or of national forces, of non-collaborativist forces, because we view the present Pashinyan regime as a pro-Russian collaborativist regime. Therefore, if the change of regime occurs and people will come into power who are more centered, Armenian-centered, and they're looking for the best interest of Armenia, then I'm sure Armenia's vector of foreign policy will change, which will inevitably result in Armenia bringing up the issue of territorial integrity of Armenia as internationally recognized. And at that time, again, we'll be going to International Court of Justice with our demand saying that Artsakh is part of Armenia based on the decisions of the League of Nations, the Tsrer agreement, and by the lastly but not least, by the Wilsonian mandate. And those three tools or the weapons that we have that we can use to go to the International Court of Justice and to present our case, I think will surely result in the International Court of Justice recognizing Artsakh as part of Armenia and not part of Azerbaijan. Even more so, they would recognize Nakhichevan, Gardmank, also part of Armenia, since prior mentioned three international agreements have proven that those are part of Armenia. So territorial integrity of Armenia is as important as territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. However, the question is, how do you decide where do the borders end and finish, or start and finish? And that decision, if the two parties, in this case Armenia and Azerbaijan, do not agree, then International Court of Justice is the place to go with your proof and evidence, and you have to present your case. But as I said, the present government, collaborative government, Russian puppet government, Putin's lackey government of Nikol Pashinyan will never do that.
Unfortunately. And Mr. Yegnukian, thank you for accepting our invitation and for interesting talk we had. And dear followers, please subscribe and bring your donations to the lobbying that the National Democratic Alliance started. It will be very much helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yegnukian.
Thank you.